Blood streamed from the human soldier's gut as the Kroloth warrior plunged a jagged knife into his abdomen, again and again, but the human just wouldn't die. Captain James Maverick Anderson of the Earth Defense Force had led his squad deep into the jungles of planet Zephyrus on a vital recon mission. They needed to find the hidden base of the evil reptilian Kroloth aliens and destroy it, or the Kroloth would use it to launch their final genocidal assault on Earth. But the Kroloth had ambushed Maverick's squad. Maverick was the only survivor. Now he was the Kroloth's prisoner, and they were dead set on getting Earth's secrets out of him, or just killing him for their twisted alien amusement. But Maverick had no intention of talking or dying. He was a human, and the Kroloth were about to learn what that really meant. The hard way. The Kroloth soldiers dragged Maverick's battered body through the winding corridors of their hidden base. His hands and feet were bound by energy shackles that burned his skin on contact. Blood dripped from his many wounds, leaving a crimson trail on the cold metal floor. They eventually reached a large chamber deep in the heart of the compound. Waiting for them was General Zarthok, the fearsome Kroloth commander. His yellow reptilian eyes gleamed with malice as he beheld the captive human. "Ah, the mighty human warrior. Not so mighty now, are you?" Zarthok sneered, his forked tongue flicking between his fangs. "You will tell me the secrets of your pathetic species' defenses, or you will suffer beyond your worst imaginings." Maverick met the alien's gaze defiantly, even as he hung limp in the soldier's grasp. "Buddy, I've taken shits more intimidating than you. You want our secrets? Come a little closer and I'll whisper 'em to you real gentle-like." Zarthok snarled and slammed a clawed fist into Maverick's gut, doubling him over. The general grabbed the human's hair and wrenched his head back. "I will enjoy breaking you, ape. Your screams will echo through this base before the end." Thus began a brutal cycle of torture that tested the very limits of Maverick's strength and will. They started by stripping him naked and strapping him to an icy metal table. Kroloth technicians attached electrodes to every sensitive area, his temples, his joints, his groin. Bolts of searing agony ripped through him as they pumped electricity into his body. His muscles seized and his back arched against the restraints. He bit down so hard he felt a molar crack, but he didn't scream. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. When the shock torture failed to loosen his tongue, they moved on to even crueler methods. Zarthok himself took a perverse pleasure in working Maverick over, his expert fingers finding every nerve cluster to pinch, every soft spot to bruise. The Kroloth ripped out Maverick's fingernails one by one, flayed strips of skin from his arms and chest, took a scalpel to the soles of his feet and laughed as he writhed. Through it all, Maverick retreated deep inside his mind, focusing on his training. The pain was temporary. His duty was forever. Earth depended on him. He would endure anything, suffer anything, to protect his home. After hours or maybe days, Zarthok finally lost his patience with the human's refusal to talk. He summoned Dr. Velmir, the Kroloth's chief scientist, and a sadist without equal. "The human has a stronger will than I anticipated," the general growled. "I'm authorizing you to use your most advanced techniques, splice his genes, inject him with your concoctions, rip into his psyche. I don't care what it takes. Break him." Dr. Velmir rubbed his webbed hands together eagerly, his bulbous eyes shining. "Of course, General. I have some exquisite ideas for how to shatter this primate's resolve." The mind games were in some ways worse than the physical tortures. Dr. Velmir pumped Maverick full of drugs that made his worst fears and most horrific memories come to vivid life all around him. At the same time, the doctor whispered vile suggestions into his drugged brain. "Oh, your comrades are dead, human. Your fleet is burning, your cities are ash, you have nothing left to protect. Surrender to us, and perhaps we will let you live as a slave." But Maverick pushed through the hallucinations, even as phantom horrors clawed at him, and illusory dead friends pleaded with him to give in. None of it was real. Only his mission was real. Still, as Dr. Velmir's experiments escalated in cruelty and intensity, Maverick could feel his body starting to weaken. He knew his time was running short. Even his iron will could only take so much. So in the scant moments he was left alone between sessions, his razor-sharp mind began to formulate a desperate plan. The Kroloth had made one mistake. They had underestimated him. They thought their restraints and their technology could hold a human. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The fools had no idea what was coming for them. All Maverick needed was one chance. Maverick's chance finally came when a Kroloth guard entered his cell alone to bring him a meager ration of foul-smelling gruel. The guard reached down to unshackle one of Maverick's hands so he could eat. In that instant, Maverick lashed out with all his remaining strength. He seized the guard's wrist and wrenched it savagely to the side. The alien's bones snapped with a sickening crack. Before the Kroloth could even process what had happened, Maverick pulled him close and clamped his teeth down on the guard's throat. He tore through scales and sinew until he tasted hot copper blood. The Kroloth thrashed and gurgled, but Maverick held on like a pit bull, growling through his mouthful of alien flesh. Finally, the guard went limp. Maverick released his jaws and let the body slump to the floor. He took a moment to spit out chunks of gore, then set to work freeing himself from his restraints using the guard's key card. His muscles screamed in protest as he hauled himself upright for the first time in days. "All right, you scaly bastards," Maverick muttered, his voice gravelly from dehydration and screaming. "Time to show you what happens when you fuck with a human." He stripped the dead Kroloth of his armor and weapons, a wicked-looking plasma rifle and a jagged combat knife. The armor was ill-fitting on Maverick's bulkier human frame, but it would have to do. He couldn't afford to be picky. Maverick crept to the cell door and peered out into the corridor. 2 more Kroloth guards stood sentry at the end of the hall, their backs to him. Maverick took a deep breath, braced himself, and then charged. His sudden appearance took the guards by surprise. Maverick drilled the first one between its bulbous eyes with a plasma bolt before it could even raise its weapon. As the second guard turned to face him, Maverick closed the distance and buried his knife to the hilt in the alien's neck. Neon blue blood sprayed across the human's face as he ripped the blade free. The Kroloth crumpled, its claws scrabbling weakly at its throat. Maverick put it out of its misery with a point-blank headshot. Alarms began to blare as the base's security systems detected the unauthorized kills. Maverick knew he only had minutes before the whole place was on high alert. He had to move fast. He took off at a run down the twisting corridors, following the route he'd memorized when they'd dragged him in for interrogation. Kroloth soldiers appeared at every turn, weapons bristling. Maverick gunned them down with ruthless efficiency, plasma bolts sizzling through their armor like it was tissue paper. When his rifle clicked empty, he snatched up another from a fallen foe without breaking stride. His bare feet pounded on the metal decking, leaving bloody footprints in his wake. He was a whirlwind of death, unstoppable. At last, lungs burning and muscles quivering with fatigue, Maverick reached the hangar bay. A squad of elite Kroloth troopers stood guard over the sleek alien spacecraft inside. Maverick didn't hesitate. With a primal roar, he threw himself into their midst. What followed was a blur of slashing claws, thudding plasma bolts and spraying blood. Maverick fought like a man possessed, his stolen knife and rifle dealing death in equal measure. He took hits that would have felled a lesser man, gashes across his back, plasma burns on his legs and shoulders, a claw puncture dangerously close to his heart. But he pushed through the pain, his lips peeled back in a feral snarl. The Kroloth fell before him like wheat, before a scythe, until only Maverick remained standing, chest heaving, and blood dripping from a dozen wounds. There was no time to catch his breath. Reinforcements would be here any second. Maverick limped to the nearest fighter craft and hauled himself into the cockpit. The controls were alien, but he'd been trained to fly anything with an engine. His fingers danced across the console, prepping for takeoff. Just as the hangar doors began to slide open, admitting a fresh wave of Kroloth, Maverick punched the ignition. The spacecraft leapt forward, accelerating hard enough to slam him back in his seat. Plasma bolts pinged off his shields as he rocketed out of the bay and into the sky over the jungle. The base's automated defenses swiveled to track him, filling the air with deadly energy beams. Maverick jinked and juked, pushing the agile fighter to its limits. Warning klaxons blared as his shields rapidly depleted. He was almost out of time. With a final desperate roll, Maverick slipped through the defensive perimeter. His shields collapsed just as he cleared the base's firing range. A few final plasma bolts scorched his hull, leaving pitted scars in the metal. And then he was free, soaring up into the stratosphere with the jungle falling away beneath him. Maverick let out a shuddering breath and slumped back in his seat. Blood loss and exhaustion threatened to drag him into unconsciousness, but he fought it off. He wasn't out of danger yet. He had to get this ship safely back to EDF lines. He had vital intel on the Kroloth base and their plans, and he had payback to deliver in spades. Maverick set a course for friendly territory and pushed the throttle to full. Time to bring the pain to these alien freaks, time to show them what it meant to be human. Maverick's stolen fighter craft streaked through the sky, plasma bolts from pursuing Kroloth ships sizzling past his cockpit. Warning lights flashed across his console as the enemy fire strained his already damaged shields. He wrenched the control yoke, sending his ship into a gut-churning spiral. G-forces pressed him back into his seat, reopening the barely clotted wounds that cross-hatched his body. "That all you got?" Maverick growled through gritted teeth. "I've flown through tougher flak on a milk run." He leveled out and punched the throttle, rockets flaring as he strained to outpace the Kroloth fighters. The hull shuddered around him, the spacecraft protesting the demands he placed on it. Maverick's gaze flicked over the unfamiliar controls, desperate for anything that might give him an edge. There! His bloodshot eyes landed on a pulsing green button, labeled with alien script. Maverick couldn't read Kroloth, but he'd mashed enough buttons in his career to know that you always push the weird glowy ones. He jabbed it hard with his thumb. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then a cool, feminine voice filled the cockpit, speaking in crisp English. "Experimental cloaking device activated. Cloak will engage in 3, 2, 1. The canopy shimmered, then turned utterly transparent. Maverick could see clear through the nose of his ship as if it wasn't there at all. He glanced over his shoulder and found only empty sky where his fighter's tail should be. A fierce grin split his battered face. "Now that's more like it." The pursuing Kroloth scattered in confusion as their target vanished from sensors. Plasma fire went wide, seeking a ship that was no longer there. Maverick wove between the disoriented enemy craft, resisting the urge to take pot shots as he passed. Escape first, payback later. Maverick angled his nose up, rocketing out of the atmosphere and into the starry void of space. As the adrenaline ebbed, the full weight of his injuries began to register. His vision swam, and his hands shook on the controls. "Keep it together, Marine," he admonished himself sternly. "No nap time till the job's done." He set a course for the nearest human outpost, praying the ship had enough juice to get him there. The onboard computers were worse than useless, spitting out angry red Kroloth script that probably translated to "get bent, thief." He was flying blind in more ways than one. The first few hours passed in a haze of pain and concentration. Maverick forced himself to stay awake, through sheer stubborn force of will. He'd rest when he was dead, and he had no intention of giving the Reaper that satisfaction just yet. Maverick was just starting to think he might actually pull this off when the fighter gave a sickening lurch. Alarm klaxons blared as smoke belched from the control console. The cloaking shield flickered and died, leaving him naked in space. No, don't you quit on me now, you alien piece of shit." Maverick slapped at the sparking controls, but got no response. Main propulsion was offline, life support close behind. He was dead in the void. Options, he needed options. Maverick poured through the survival kit velcroed to his thigh, hoping the Kroloth was smart enough to pack a repair kit. No such luck, just some weird ration bars and a few basic med tools. He popped the tab on a stim shot and jammed it into his jugular, letting the icy rush of synthetic adrenaline clear the fog from his brain. As the fighter's systems crashed one by one around him, he turned his attention to the comms panel. Maybe he could jury-rig a distress beacon, get a signal to the EDF. Maverick froze as a burst of Kroloth chatter crackled over the open channel. He couldn't understand the words, but he knew the harsh, guttural language of the enemy when he heard it. His fingers danced over the controls, trying to clean up the signal. Forward base, 2 cycles. A few scattered words resolved into English. Maverick frowned. A Kroloth forward base? That was news to intelligence. He leaned closer to the speaker. Amassing troops. Neza colony, ripe for conquest. A chill ran down Maverick's spine. The Neza colony. 50,000 human souls living and working and raising their families on the border of Kroloth space. If the aliens were massing forces for an attack, he had to warn them, had to get this intel back to the EDF. But his ship was crippled, comms fried. He was one man, alone and bleeding, against the might of the Kroloth war machine. Maverick clenched his jaw, a cold fire kindling in his gut. One man, one human. That would have to be enough. His gaze fell on the blinking text of the ship's self-destruct prompt. The Kroloth couldn't have his stolen craft back, even as scrap. But maybe, just maybe, he could jury-rig the antimatter reactor into a one-shot thruster. Ride the blast wave like a bat out of hell, and get his warning to Nazar before the Kroloth armada arrived. It was a stupid plan, suicidal even by his standards. The odds of him surviving an uncontrolled antimatter detonation were only slightly better than the odds of the Kroloth inviting him over for tea and crumpets. But he was out of options and out of time. Maverick cracked his knuckles and got to work, a savage smile on his bloody lips. "Buckle up, Bug Eyes," he muttered. "I'm coming in hot." Maverick's vision blurred as he wrestled with the stolen fighter's controls. The craft bucked and shuddered around him, alarms shrieking, consoles sparking. Pain lanced through his abused body with every shockwave. His fingers slipped on the blood-slick control yoke. He blinked sweat and grime from his eyes, forcing himself to focus. The Nazar colony filled his forward view screen, a fragile bubble of humanity suspended against the pitiless void. 50,000 lives, unaware of the hell that was about to descend upon them. Not on his watch. Maverick coaxed a final burst of speed from the failing engines. The hull temperature spiked as he hit the atmosphere, friction turning the shield bubble into a blazing comet trail. G-forces crushed him back into the seat, reopening barely clotted wounds. The colony's defense cannons swiveled to track him, no doubt confused by the Kroloth IFF signal. Maverick jabbed at the comms panel, wincing as the motion pulled at the burns on his arm. "This is Captain James Anderson of the EDF. Hold your fire, repeat, hold your fire. I have vital intelligence. The colony is about to be attacked." He prayed to whatever gods were listening that the defense grid commander wasn't some trigger-happy new boot. After a heart-stopping pause, the targeting locks winked out. Maverick exhaled harshly. The fighter was coming apart around him, smoke filling the cockpit, indicator lights flashing red across the board. He aimed the nose at the colony's central landing pad and yanked the ejection handle. Nothing happened. Shit! The damaged mechanism must have fused. Maverick was trapped in a metal coffin streaking toward the ground at terminal velocity. He did the only thing he could, wrestled with the dying craft's trajectory, trying to bleed off speed. The colony buildings rushed up to meet him, looming like tombstones. At the last possible second, Maverick wrenched the nose up. The fighter pancaked into the tarmac in a scream of shearing metal. The impact slammed Maverick forward into the control panel, then sideways into the canopy. Something cracked in his chest. His helmet visor shattered, spraying him with plastiglass shards. For a long moment he just hung there, suspended in his harness, lungs heaving for air that tasted of blood and coolant. Everything hurt. It would be so easy to just let go, slip into the waiting dark. "On your feet, Marine." The voice in his head sounded suspiciously like his old drill instructor. "You've got a job to do." Maverick forced his eyes open, forced his trembling hands to fumble for the harness release. He more fell than climbed out of the smoking wreck, but he managed to get his boots under him. The colony's security forces were already rushing toward him, weapons drawn. Maverick raised his hands, swaying. I'm human, EDF, don't shoot, I have a warning. The guards hesitated, confused. Maverick must have looked like a nightmare, clad in bloody Kroloth armor, face a mask of bruises and gore. He used their momentary paralysis to stagger forward. Is this how you greet all your guests? He tried for a cocky grin, but it came out as more of a grimace. The closest guard, a hard-faced woman with lieutenant's bars, raised her rifle. Identify yourself, what the hell is going on? Captain James Anderson, EDF Marine Corps. I just busted out of a Kroloth torture chamber and stole one of their ships, and I intercepted comms traffic that said they're about to attack this colony, in force, so maybe we could skip the 20 questions and get me to your commander, yeah? The guards exchanged nervous looks. The lieutenant made a decision and lowered her weapon, jerking her head at the colony's central tower. With me, if you're lying, you won't live long enough to regret it. Maverick sketched a mocking salute and limped after her. Each step was agony, his abused muscles screaming, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through. The colony's command center was in chaos when they arrived. Uniformed men and women rushed back and forth, shouting, consoles beeping urgently. In the center of the storm, a grim-faced officer in a major's uniform leaned over a holomap. The lieutenant led Maverick to him. Sir, this man claims... I heard. The major straightened, his eyes hard as flint as they raked over Maverick's battered form. You say the Kroloth are coming, Captain? When? How many? What are their targets? Maverick snapped to attention on reflex, ignoring the fresh trickle of blood the motion sent down his back. Within the hour, sir. At least a dozen capital ships, twice that in support craft, troop transports, landing barges. This colony is their primary target, but once they establish a beachhead... He let the implication hang. They all knew what would follow. The Kroloth would swarm over the planet like locusts, killing or enslaving every human they found. The major swore under his breath. He jabbed a finger at his comms officer. Get a message to EDF Command, Priority Alpha. Request immediate reinforcements. He turned back to Maverick. You're sure about this, Captain? Bet my life on it, sir. Maverick's vision was starting to tunnel, his abused body finally reaching its limits, but he had one more duty to perform. He drew himself up to his full height, ignoring the screaming of his wounds. His voice rang out across the command center, steady and strong. Major, I've seen what these alien freaks can do. They tortured me for days, killed my entire squad, but I learned something in that hellhole. The Kroloth think we're weak. They think we'll break, shatter like glass the moment they apply pressure. Maverick swept his gaze across the room, making eye contact with every man and woman. But they're wrong. Humanity is steel. We bend, but we don't break. And when we're forged in the fires of battle, there's nothing in this galaxy that can stand against us. He thrust a fist in the air. So let the Kroloth come. Let them see what happens when you piss off the human race. We'll drive them back to the void that spawned them. Who's with me? A ragged cheer swept the room, quickly swelling into a roar. The major nodded, something like respect kindling in his eyes. Just then, alarms blared. The major's head snapped around to the sensor station. Report. Multiple warp signatures detected. Kroloth capital ships bearing 175 Mark III. The major cursed. He spun back to Maverick. Looks like we're out of time. I hope you're as good as you say you are, Captain. Maverick just grinned, a feral baring of teeth. Better, sir. Now someone get me a damned rifle. I've got some payback to deliver. The Kroloth ships hung in the void like bloated predators, disgorging waves of troop transports and attack craft. Maverick stood in the colony's primary defense battery, a captured Kroloth plasma rifle cradled in his arms. Agony seared his every nerve ending. Exhaustion dragged at his bones, but a savage joy filled him at the sight of his hated enemy. The major's voice crackled over the comms, steady and resolute. All defense teams prepare to repel borders. This is it, people. Hold the line. No one gets through, no matter the cost. Maverick chinned his mic. Roger that, sir. Let's give these bastards a welcome they won't soon forget. A fierce chorus of affirmatives answered him. At his side, grim-faced Marines and colonists hefted rifles and manned gun emplacements. They looked to him, the legendary hero who had single-handedly escaped the Kroloth, and brought warning of the attack. He met their gazes with a nod of comradeship, a silent promise. The Kroloth fell upon the colony like a tidal wave, plasma screeching, claws extended. But the humans met them with a wall of steel and fire. Maverick was everywhere, rallying the defenders, his rifle spitting blue death. He fought like a man possessed, the faces of his lost squadmates flashing before his eyes. "For Earth! For humanity!" The battle cry tore from his throat as he led a charge into the heart of the Kroloth formation. Plasma bolts stitched the ground around him, searing his armor, but he barely felt them. There was only the enemy, and the primal need to destroy them. At first it seemed like the Kroloth numbers would overwhelm them. For every alien that fell, 3 more landed in its place. The human lines buckled, strained. Then, like an angel out of myth, a wing of EDF strike fighters screamed over the horizon. Missiles and cannon fire rained from the sky, shredding the Kroloth advance. The aliens shrieked in fear and confusion as the reinforcements slammed into their flank. Maverick raised his rifle over his head and bellowed in triumph. "Forward, drive them back, for Earth!" The human forces surged like a cresting wave, all fatigue forgotten in the rush of victory. Maverick led the charge, rallying his brothers and sisters in arms. The Kroloth fell before them, their formations shattering, their ships burning. After hours of brutal close-quarters battle, the surviving aliens finally broke and ran. Their ships limped into the sky, trailing smoke and bodies, fleeing before the human onslaught. A ragged cheer went up from the human lines as the last Kroloth transport vanished into the void. Maverick slumped against a shattered barricade, every muscle trembling with fatigue. But a fierce grin split his bloody face as he watched the alien ships flee. They had done it. Against all odds, outgunned and outnumbered, they had held the line. The Major found him there, picking his way through the rubble and twisted alien corpses. The older man clasped Maverick's shoulder, eyes bright with battle light. "You magnificent bastard. You saved us all. I'm recommending you for the Star of Terror." Maverick shook his head. "I'm no hero, sir. I just did what any human would do when the chips are down. We all held the line today." He raised his voice so the gathered defenders could hear. "You hear that, you Kroloth bastards? That's the sound of humanity, united. We'll never stop fighting, never stop pushing back the dark. One man, one colony, one species, unbreakable." The defenders raised a ragged cheer that echoed from the blasted buildings. Maverick pumped his fist in the air, bloody and battered but unbowed. For he was human, and that was enough. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.